welcome everyone to tonight's club meeting, especially those that have come from a long way to listen to tonight's speakers. So yeah, our main speaker is Peter Marsack. So Peter originally trained as a zoologist, but has also worked extensively as a freelance natural history illustrator, and that was after studying plant and wildlife illustration at the University of Newcastle. So he was a senior artist for the multi-volume Handbook of Australian, New Zealand and Antarctic Birds, and is one of 3 artists to illustrate the Australian Bird Guide. And that was published by CSIRO in 2017. So he has a particular interest in the way that science and art overlap, and he also has an interest in the value of field sketching as a basis for artwork and for getting more out of birding. So the Australian Bird Guide itself was actually awarded the Whitley Award in 2017 for the best book on Australian animals that was published within that year. And it also won the Small Publisher Adult Book of the Year for 2018 in the Australian Book Industry Awards. So the content of this guide has now been downsized to produce the pocket-sized compact guide as well. So without further ado, I want to welcome Peter to take to the stage and present his talk for us tonight.
When I started thinking about this talk, I thought I'd go back to the business of why people want guides in the first place, not just bird guides, but a lot of stuff about natural history. If you go online, you can find there's guides to hoverflies in Britain, there's guides to the natural history of vacant lots in America. People really want to know what's out there, and they're trying to connect. It's a pleasure. One of the things they're after is listing, working out what's there, building on it, getting more and more, and knowledge, learning to identify stuff. So knowledge is actually the basis of the way bird guides have evolved and what drives the business of bird illustration now. So we're talking about, especially with HANZAB, something that's the sum of all knowledge. A lot of you are probably aware of this. That's HANZAB, Handbook of Australian, New Zealand and Antarctic Birds. That's one of 7 volumes. As birders get knowledgeable, they demand more information. Pretty hard to do with something you can carry around easily. So the handbook approach, which has happened around the world, but Australia has done a pretty good job, the steaming pile of data. You drag everything together and you try and make sense of it. And that included a fair bit of artwork. So HANZAB was started in the 1980s, and it ran on a shoestring and it finished in 2005. A lot of people worked as volunteers or on starvation wages. It was a pioneering effort in Australia. We discovered that birds that we thought we knew, we didn't know that well and hadn't described them that well. So there was a project to send banders out to collect particular data on things like eye colour, leg colour, that kind of thing. And from the art point of view, there were much fewer photographs available for references, so a lot of this work was based on specimens and colour standards. That's what the full set of HANZAB looks like. Each of those is about 1,000 odd pages. There is a lot of data there. Years ago, someone dragged this around Australia when they were doing a big year, but for most people, you're not going to carry this stuff. There is a massive amount of work there, and for the artists, here's a HANZAB text that's been prepared from a text author looking at skins and going through feather track by feather track, identifying the colours, matching them to a colour standard, sending the artist this text. So here's a HANZAB text with colour notes. This is for red-capped parrot in Western Australia, a rather lurid coloured beast. And there you are, 32 colours for one bird. So that's my drawing that became that, and there are the individual colours marked up on there. So you can see it's pretty rare to have one of these things that doesn't have a number 76 on it, which is a sort of grey-brown colour. It's a commonly occurring thing. But I actually like the small brown birds and subtlety here. I find bright colours a bit overcoming. So, specimen skins. HANZAB required text authors to sit down and wade through and measure and examine a lot, tens of thousands of specimens from Australian collections, especially the National Wildlife Collection in Canberra, which is particularly useful because they've got good provenance on their specimens. It dates back mostly to the 60s and no older. If you go to the museum in Sydney, you'll find stuff that was shot and collected and prepared in the 1880s, 1890s, and there's almost no information on them, where they were found, anything else. And sometimes you've got one species name crossed out, another one put in. So having good context is important. And from the artist's point of view, skins are great for information on colour and pattern, but absolutely, well, much less so for structure and shape. That's what a tray of skins looks like, Lewin's honey eaters from the wildlife collection in Canberra. And from those, from measurements, from descriptions, hopefully from looking at live birds and from a few photos, you try and draw up something that's going to be the basis of your artwork. So these are magnificent rifle birds that are based on measurements that I took in the wildlife collection. And at this stage, you are counting feather tracks, especially for things like pelagics, that kind of thing. So how do you take the massive information there and make it accessible to people who want to go out in the field? The obvious thing is maybe an app, which I might touch on later. But really, a lot of the time, you are looking for an image, so people can decide what something is by looking at it. Then they go to descriptions, background detail, that kind of thing. For identification, you provide the right detail, you allow a comparison with confusion species, and you're trying to explain. And explanation, I think, is the key difference between being an artist and being an illustrator. An illustrator, you're trying to explain stuff without confusing. Artists, like photographers, they can do anything. Why not photos? I took this photo in Northeast India on a birding trip nearly 10 years ago, and it's the first time I'd seen a group of birders who didn't have a pair of binoculars between them. Everything, they were expert birders, they were chasing rare species, but everything they saw was either through the viewfinder or in the back of the camera. For me, this is my breakdown of why photos are good and bad. On the pro side, they're instant, so it doesn't take long to make a photo compared to looking at a bird and doing a sketch in the field. They're detailed, because cameras now are fantastic. They'll get a massive amount of detail in there. You can stop the action, so you can get a good look at things. They're objective if you choose your moment to get a photograph that will tell you what you're looking for. And you can use them as a substitute for study. You don't look at the bird, you look at the photograph later. On the reverse side, they are unique and specific, which could be good, could be bad. If you take a photograph of a person sneezing and put it up as a portrait, no one's going to recognize it. So it's not, you have to have the right photograph, so it can be misleading in that way. You could say they're subjective. You might choose to pick the right moment to take a picture that shows exactly what you want. And again, the opposite, substitute for study, that's not a good thing. Having a, to my mind, you're not going to learn about birds if all you do is look at photographs, especially if you're seeing photographs on the back of a camera or on a monitor when you get home. So in fact, good identification photos are actually surprisingly rare. This is a photograph of a female speckled warbler taken by a good friend of mine. This is kind of perfect as a field ID photograph. It's got the bird side on, so you can see the proportions, you can see all the key features of plumage. You can see that it's a female by the sort of rufous feathers in the crown stripe there. And because the light isn't strong and glary, you haven't got distracting shadows, because that's one of the things that illustrators are basically having to edit out, is the effects of light. You're just trying to show shape without confusing, having light cast on that kind of thing. So let's take superb fairy wren, adult male breeding. Easy, there's squillions of decent photographs of adult male fairy wren in breeding plumage. Probably some perfect ones for identification. In fact, I'm sure there are. But on the same plate, you want adult female, you want juvenile bird, you want a an eclipse male, you might want to show a bit of behaviour in a flight shot, and you want all those without distractions, without light and shadow causing problems. And that's one species, and then on the same plate you've got possible confusion species, and you want to show them in comparable positions. You've got the same things. If probably for most of the plates in the bird guide or HANZAB, you're looking at 4 to 6 species on a plate. You're just not going to find that many perfect photos. So there is a reason for going this way. So just going back, this is what illustration can do, as opposed to photography. Show you what you need to avoid confusion, understand complexity and unpick it, and identify what you're looking at and hopefully appreciate it, and leave out anything you don't want. So it's a complex system. The world out there is busy and confusing, and of course there's varied light and vegetation and habitat. So here's a hypothetical male superb fairy wren in breeding plumage. Bright sunlight, standing on a log, casting a strong shadow, dry grassy woodland, bit of lichen on the log. You're going to be looking for things to leave out. It's quite useful as a sort of an indication of character and behaviour. But imagine it's your job to illustrate life on Earth, and you have to come up with the photo of, or the image of a breeding male human.
Oh.
Which would you pick? You have to decide. They're both kind of alpha males. The job of the illustrator is to come up with something that averages things out and explains it. So the next step with trying to put together the Australian Bird Guide was to look at the steaming pile of data we had in HANZAB, which Mick's going to talk about in a minute, and look at new guides in the US and Europe. These two, the Sibley Guide and the Svensson and Milani and Zetterstrom, they're both sort of major steps forward in providing a lot more information. They're extremely portable, widely appreciated by birders. There's probably a lot of information in them, but the thing that stands out is the quality and the extent of the artwork. So, summing up, we're basing the idea of the guide on those European and US guides. The approach is based much more on field observation and identification and information, aging, sexing, regional identification. Measurements and description from HANZAB are still important, still useful, but there are many, many more reference photographs available. This is starting in about 2009-10, and at that point, the lead artist, who was one of the drivers behind this book, had pulled together something approaching 200,000 online photos. Mostly of fairy wrens. But the Australian Bird Guide, Jeff and I thought this would be an easy 5-year project for the two of us, and it turned into a 9-year project, and we had to bring someone else on. 4,700 images. Once you started looking at the things you could separate visually in the field, there was much more than we imagined. So running quickly through the 3 artists, part of the problem with having 3 artists, of course, is each of us has different styles, different handwriting. So we had to try and come up with a kind of beautiful look. If you're interested and you have the blue book, you can see the artist's name in the bottom left-hand corner. So Jeff was the lead artist. He's the guy who helped drive this project from the start, and he managed the photographic side of things. He did the larger parrots, but his chief focus was waders and pelagics. And I'm no pelagic birder, but Mick would probably say this book is a major step forward in the information on pelagics. Kim Franklin was the third one to come on. He'd worked on the birds of prey of the world, so he copped that one, and he got quite a lot of the other non-passerines and a few of the vagrant passerines. And you can see he's got a slightly different style from the two of us, from Jeff and me, but it's still compatible. And this is me working on pretty much all the passerines, but basically small brown birds are my thing. I've now done the fairy wrens, grass wrens, and emu wrens for 3 different books, and that's enough. So how do you proceed? Birds only have some simple properties: size, shape, colour, and character, that allow you to identify them in the field. Come up with an image that you can work with that will tell you what's going on. How hard can it be to describe a bird? There's a sample field guide text. It's cut down nicely, so it'll fit in a book you can carry around. This is a vagrant warbler, Pallas's grasshopper warbler. If you know what a grasshopper warbler is, you could probably make some sense of that text, but it makes a lot of sense just to go straight to the bird. And then the two together, back and forth, bring it together. So my job as an illustrator is to work with references, decide on what's essential, what matters, what the point of each particular image is, and to render the artwork. And in that, I'm guided mainly by the text from the authors and the measurements we've got from HANZAB. If possible, from observation and field sketching, and I'll talk a bit about that. From specimens, if necessary, and overwhelmingly for this end of things, photographs. Every so often you get a chance to be out in the field and you can find a bird that cooperates. You can sit down with a spotting scope and you can just make all the field reference notes. This is very nice, quiet, immobile red-backed kingfisher, and I was able to sit there and draw it for 20 minutes through a spotting scope. Couldn't have cared less.
Wow.
And that went more or less straight across into a plate for the one of the Kingfisher ID things for Wingspan many years ago. If you can do that, that's great, but the chances are you'll just have a fleeting look at something, but everything you can get from eye to paper, you are learning something about the character of the bird. It's different from going through the photographic process. You are learning key, deep memories about how the bird's put together. So here's an example of some really fantastic field work and illustration by Lars Jonsson, who is a Swedish illustrator. These are Philoscopus warblers, which we'll come to later, but just look at the perfection and the subtlety of these. You can see for Philoscopus it matters whether their primaries are emarginated, and he's got that. His birds, just looking at them, you'll see that they look quite plump because they're European and they're in cold climate. But bear that in mind when we come to them later. Now, if you know a bird bander and you're interested in drawing and painting birds, go and sit at the banding table. You'll have a chance to see things really close to. This is one place where I'd suggest you take photographs. You don't want to hang around drawing. But it allows you to look at stuff like, how the eye sits relative to the bill, how wing stripes appear, how if you have to paint a bird flying and show the wing stripe, there it is. And looking at this bird, you can see these pale tips on the tertials and on the alveolar there. They're retained juvenile plumage, so that bird is in its first year. And you can look for those in the field if you know what to look for. And interestingly, juvenile birds are one of the confusion areas for a lot of people starting out birding because they don't look like a perfect specimen, a perfect adult, brightly coloured bird. Here's a juvenile woolly wagtail. You look how much rufous sort of brown there is in the coverts. That sort of fringing rufous look is quite a common thing in juvenile birds. There was a nice thing on aging brown honeyeaters in one of the newsletters recently, and Rob had a really nice photo of a young brown honeyeater. And the first thing I saw when I looked at that, apart from the gape on it, was the eye colour was totally different from the adult. It's grey instead of red. So when you see those birds that don't look quite right, consider, it might be an aging thing. They might be young birds. crested shrike. It's just in here because it's a beautiful bird. And what a great chance to see something like this, and it's a great thing to work from when you're painting detail when the time comes through. And this bird was shortly about to take a big chunk out of the bander's hand. Anyway, these are the key measurements that we work with when drawing up a bird, plus the legs, so tail, wing length, culmen, bill length, and tarsus down here. And they're the proportion things that you look for when you're comparing species. If you look at Southern Island pied oyster catcher, it's got shorter legs than your regular. That's the most obvious feature. Anyway, one of the things we were criticised for on the big bird guide was not using total length of the bird, which is common in most bird guides, because we felt that it was misleading. All these birds have the same overall length, but the shape is very different. That said, now we've got this out and we've given in and we're putting the total length on there. It just makes it more comparable. So they're the things you need to build a bird from measurements: total head length, bill length, wing, tail, and tarsus. If you're a bander, you'll know that total head length is something you can get when you're handling a bird. You can't really get it from specimens in a museum because they take most of the skeleton out. So it's very useful to have a total head length. HANZAB has a lot of that kind of information. Back to Pallas's grasshopper warbler. This is a fairly typical photograph. Not a lot to work with. There are good overseas photographs and descriptions, but when you've got that, it's very useful to be able to take the measurements, apply it to the head, total head length, wing, tail, whatever, and come up with the sort of your base model bird, which you know is accurate based on those. And that bottom image forms the basis of these two here. So the actual process of putting a plate together in a book, we paint them on things roughly A3 or a bit bigger in Jeff's case, a single sheet with generally for 15 or 20 bird images. And it's very analog, at least for the way I work. You do individual images on tracing paper, stick them down where you want them, where you think it makes an attractive layout, and send it off to the text author, and they say that's wrong or put something else in. When you've got it right, and you flip it over and trace it down. So this is the reed warblers, Australian, oriental, little grass bird, spinifex bird, 4 species. And once you've got that, you transfer it to your paper and you block it in. This is the sort of the base colours that you hope you've got right. And at this stage, it looks pretty dreadful. You can see it looks like a sort of kid's drawing, but you can see when you've got major problems with shape, and that is the time when it's a lot easier to sort out and fix. From here, it's just a process of refining and adding detail. So you can see how these have transformed quite a bit just by layering and putting detail on top. A couple of plates finished and ready to go off to be labelled and handed to the tender mercies of the publishers and the printers. So Birds of Paradise, some of the thornbills. Each of these images at the printing stage would be individually digitised so you can move them around, which is a good thing because we kept having new information come in. Oddly, the golden whistler is one of the problem species because they decided that the western golden whistler was actually a separate species after we painted the plate. So we had to, remodel stuff like that. That is part of the process. And all the time, odds and ends were turning up vagrant species. And we all breathed a sigh of relief. A Nicobar pigeon arrived too late. We didn't have to do it. It'll probably be in the newest version. Yeah. So this takes us through to the sort of perhaps the ridiculous end of things. These are vagrant Philostratus warblers. Remember back to Lars Jonsson. Look how sort of thin and skinny they look. They've come to the tropics they're stressed, they're in the wrong place. These are birds that are not comfortable and relaxed. There's actually 2 species there. One of them, that one, is different from these 3. These 3 are, I've had a mental black now. They are Arctic. These 3 are Arctic in various stages of decrepitude. You can see this one's got nice fresh feather tips here. This one's getting a bit faded. This one's really tatty, and the primaries are all sort of mangled. So these are birds of different ages that have been through a different experience. This one at the top there is a nice fresh-looking Kamchatka warbler. The best way to pick, as far as I know, the only one that's ever found in Australia is by song. So it's essentially identical, but we painted it anyway. So we've been, as illustrators, we're obsessed with the business of detail, and it's a pretty boring process trying to make basically the same image several times on a plate. But the search for perfection, for detail, for getting the image right is quite an old one. This is a painting that I like to show people. It was painted in 1533 by Hans Holbein in the court of Henry VIII. He painted important people, and he painted their status symbols, so he's very good on detail. This bird's got a falconer's hood on, but anyone like a crack at identifying it?
Anna?
Yes. Lanner falcon. You can identify the bird to species. You can pick the sex from its size, because it's a relatively large bird, so it's a female. And you can possibly see difference in the colour of the coverts here. These are greyer than those ones. So this is a bird that's at least a passage bird. It's at least coming into its 2nd year. It's a fantastic painting. I haven't seen anything better. It wouldn't work in a field guide because it's got too much interesting shadow. But you know, that is spot on. It's a brilliant bit of painting. And the fact that it's a lanner means that it would have been brought to England from possibly southern Spain, but more likely North Africa. It's a massive status symbol. So illustrators like me, where you're always trying to explain stuff, you're trying to keep it simple, you're trying to get rid of stuff that doesn't matter, like shadows. We all like going out birding, and this is the kind of thing I like to do now, where you're talking about birds in the field and you're not worrying about what the light's doing, how they're standing, that kind of thing. You're just trying to catch the moment. And it's simply about enjoying a particular presence. These are the kind of little things I like to take on. This here is actually a fig tree I drew in Allen State Forest when I was here doing my illustration diploma. I really always wanted some way of fitting it into a picture. And here you're trying to show sort of light transmitted through the leaves. You'd never put that into a regular field guide. I don't know if any of you have been to Southeast Asia. Broadbills, they look like flying muppets, but this is like trying to show the richness of that Southeast Asian rainforest. Very extraordinary things. So it's just a lovely, really, truly weird bird. And possibly the best bird in the world, Himalayan mole, in northeast India. And again, this is just trying to hang on to an extraordinary moment. You get up there, it's a battle to get there, it's snowy, it's desolate, it's bleak, and they're these things the size of turkeys that are bright, iridescent birds wandering around. It's the best bird watching, it's just fantastic. But of course, when you're watching birds, they're watching you. So I'll leave you with the eye of a green broadbill, a reflection in the eye, which would be actually hard to do with a camera, because we'd have the photographer reflected there.
So thank you very much for your talk, Peter. It was fascinating, and the illustrations are wonderful. So as a thank you, you can choose a bottle of wine to take.